Okay, thank you everybody for turning up on this cold night. We're going to start by introductions of the committee. And I'm Councillor Tony Mallet, and I'm chairing the committee this evening, and we'll go around this way.
I'm Ben Bergman, I'm the committee's legal advisor.
Felicity Foley, I'm the clerk.
Tay McCoon, Community Engagement.
James Hughes, Principal Planning Officer.
John McRory, Major Applications Team Leader.
Richard Truscott, Design Officer for Haringey.
Nairita Chakraborty, Principal Conservation Officer.
Maurice Richards, Highways and Transport Planning.
Councillor Dhiren Basu, Seven Sisters Ward.
Councillor James Patterson, Alexandra.
John Bevan, Councillor, Northumberland Park.
Councillor Peter Mitchell, Woodside Ward.
Councillor Jennifer Mann, Hornsey Ward.
And I'm Councillor Dave Beecham, Alexandra Ward.
Councillor Liz Morris, Highgate Ward.
Councillor Joanna Christofides, Bounds Green.
Councillor Anne Waters, Woodside Ward.
Dean Hermitage, Head of Development Management.
Emma Williamson, Assistant Director for Planning.
Okay, thank you. I wanted to start by a small... I'll read out the filming at meetings. Please note this meeting may be filmed or recorded by the Council for live or subsequent broadcast via the Council's internet site or by anyone attending the meeting using any communication method. Although we ask members of the public recording, filming or reporting on the meeting not to include the public seating areas, members of the public attending the meeting should be aware that we cannot guarantee that they will not be filmed or recorded by others attending the meeting. Members of the public participating in the meeting, for example making deputations, asking questions, making oral protests, should be aware that they are likely to be filmed, recorded or reported on. By entering the meeting room and using the public seating area, you're consenting to being filmed and to the possible use of those images and sound recordings. The chair of the meeting has the discretion to terminate or suspend filming or recording if, in his or her opinion, continuation of the filming, recording or reporting would disrupt or prejudice the proceedings, infringe the rights of any individual, or may lead to the breach of a legal obligation by the Council. I'll go on to item 2, the planning protocol, and I'll read that out as well. The Planning Committee abides by the Council's Planning Protocol 2016. A fact sheet covering some of the key points within the protocol, as well as some of the context for Haringey's planning process, is provided alongside the agenda pack available to the public at each meeting, as well as on the Haringey Planning Committee webpage. So this is a reminder. The planning system manages the use and development of land and buildings. The overall aim of the system is to ensure a balance between enabling development to take place and conserving and protecting the environment and local amenities. Planning can also help tackle climate change and overall seeks to create better public places for people to live, work and play. It is important that the public understand that the committee makes planning decisions in this context. These decisions are rarely simple and often involve balancing competing priorities. Councillors and officers have a duty to ensure that the public are consulted, involved and, where possible, understand the decisions being made. Neither the number of objectors or supporters nor the extent of their opposition or support are of themselves material planning considerations. The Planning Committee is held as a meeting in public and not a public meeting. The right to speak from the floor is agreed beforehand in consultation with officers and the chair. Any interruptions from the public may mean that the chamber needs to be cleared. And I just wanted to ask the legal officer to comment on some of the correspondence that we've had.
Thank you, Chair. I understand there's been a lot of lobbying correspondence. Obviously, there's nothing wrong with lobbying, but as the members of the subcommittee will realise, they have to make the determinations with an open mind. that is, they have to decide the application purely on the planning merit, that is, in accordance with the statutory test, to decide the application in accordance with the development plan unless material considerations indicate otherwise. And if they were to, for instance, follow lobbying and take up the viewpoint expressed in such lobbying, it may be that they no longer have an open mind, and we would say that they perhaps predetermined the matter, in which case they can no longer participate as a member of the subcommittee and would not be allowed to participate in the meeting unless they perhaps registered to speak as a councillor speaker, in which case, even after they finish their speaker role, they would leave the room. So there's a balance councillors are aware of in their role as a subcommittee member and perhaps as a ward councillor, and they have to be aware of that in terms of lobbying. And I can just pick up on the planning protocol that the Chair mentioned. This is all expressed in the planning protocol. There's a section on lobbying, section 560, and it's now the Planning Protocol 2017. It was adopted last week at full council with very minor changes from the previous version. So I recommend that to everyone's attention. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. We'll go on to item 3, apologies.
We've got apologies from Councillor Barbara Blake and Councillor Carter as he's speaking in objection, and we have Councillor Morris and Councillor Christophidis substituting. And from Councillor Doran, of course.
Okay, item 4, urgent business.
None.
Item 5, declarations of interest. Any members have any declarations of interest? Okay, item 6, the minutes on pages 1 to 18 of the last meeting. Do members have any questions on that? No? So are these minutes agreed? I wasn't there. Sorry. Thank you. Okay. Item 7, planning applications. In accordance with the protocol, we're hearing 4 objectors. Speakers will normally have 3 minutes each. I will move on to item 8. Hornsey Town Hall, the Broadway. Could the officers please do their presentation?
Well, thank you to the Chair, and good evening to members. Officers have circulated an addendum to item 8, which everyone should have a copy of. The updates include submissions received after 21st November from residents and local groups. The addendum sets the total number of comments in support, neutral and objecting to the proposal, and Historic England has also made an additional submission that clarifies its remit on the scheme following inquiries from local residents. The application site is, of course, the Hornsey Town Hall complex in Crouch End. The site includes a number of existing buildings and uses, which officers will summarise in the slides following. As per the slide, the site is 1.3 hectares in area. This includes a town square fronting the Crouch End Broadway, and there are several listed buildings on and in the vicinity of the site. So the Town Hall complex is here, and that's listed Grade 2 star. The Broadway Annex East and West is here, and then south of the application boundary is the Hornsey Library, which is listed Grade 2. The Weston Clinic building to the rear is curtilage listed. The site is strategically allocated in the development plan and is crossed by London and local view corridors. As members know, planning permission was granted in 2010 for redevelopment of the Town Hall. These are some existing images of the site. The land to the rear of the Town Hall is currently vacant. The applicant's development concept for the site includes comprehensive restoration of the Town Hall and Broadway Annex, in addition to the erection of new build residential blocks to the rear of the Town Hall and the erection of a Muse block to the rear of the Broadway Annex. This is the applicant's Block A. which is proposed to be a linear pavilion block that runs along the eastern plot line, and this is proposed to be a Part 6 and Part 7-story building. Block B, which is here, adjoins the east wing of the Town Hall and is proposed to rise to 7 stories. As members know, this height has been reduced twice during the application process. The slide sets out the proposed land uses for the Town Hall. Red is proposed to be shared community space, yellow shows the residential block footprints, and the lighter pink is the hotel. The summary shows the proposals for the Town Hall, the 4 main elements of the use set alongside the total quantums of floor space. The key interventions for the Town Hall are as set out on the slide. Officers of the view the interventions are minimal and preserve the historic fabric of the building and will improve accessibility for users. Significantly, the proposal will see the roof of the Assembly Hall repaired and, as members know, is in very poor condition and experiencing water ingress, likely more so on an evening like tonight. Members would have seen the damage to the building during the site visit. This slide sets out the use of space within the Town Hall over 4 levels. The hotel is primarily located in the east wing, but does extend to the west wing on the 2nd floor. Officers note this proposal removes any residential flats from the Town Hall that were approved in 2010 and achieves a clear separation of uses. The proposal also retains the historic floor plate to a much greater degree than that approved in 2010. The Town Hall Square would see significant investment in restoration. As per the slide, the green space will be reconfigured to a teardrop formation, and new high-quality hard standing would be in place around the perimeter. The fountain would be repaired and remain in its current location, which is an improvement from the 2010 position. There's been a lot of feedback around the Amnesty International tree. For clarity, this tree is not proposed to be removed, but will be relocated within the reconfigured landscaped area. Officers note that Condition 7 on page 129 of the agenda package contains a bespoke condition addressing the ceremonial tree to protect this community asset. Officers have also received feedback around the securing of public access to the town square, and this will be the subject of a Section 106 obligation. This is an indicative image of the redesigned town square for members' reference. The applicant proposes the erection of new build residential development to the rear of the town hall in 2 blocks and the erection of a 3-story muse development to the rear of the Broadway Annex. The height and number of residential units are as per the slide. Officers note the building footprints are broadly commensurate with the 2010 planning position. This is the unit mix for the proposal across the site. The applicant is proposing 11 units of affordable housing following viability negotiations with the council, and those units are highlighted in red. The overall mix of units is considered acceptable in the context of the area. This is an indicative image of the proposed blocks looking southbound. The applicant proposes a north-south access by way of Haringey Park. This is the lower ground floor for blocks A and B, with block B on the lower side of the slide. The development incorporates 33 underground parking spaces below block A, and cycle parking is incorporated on the lower ground level of each block. This is the ground floor plan for the new build development and shows the general layout of the floor plates. These floor plates are generally replicated for the upper floors with a setback design. And this is the top floor showing the layout of block A with the 2 pavilion elements set back toward the middle of the block. Another indicative image, this one shows the landscaped area the applicant is proposing within the site that will lie to the north of Block B. The landscaping changes to the scheme were in part a response to the Quality Review Panel's comments to ensure the internal north-south access is high quality. The material planning issues are as per the slide, and they are numerous. There's a lot of issues to consider. The key issues are set out in the slides following, and officers will briefly touch on the other planning issues if required. The development is acceptable in principle. The applicant's development proposal meets with the site allocation requirements in the development plan. The provision of a mixed-use scheme that includes a hotel and shared use community uses with co-working space meets with the parameters of SA 48 in the DPD. Officers consider the site's designation as an asset of community value is compatible with the development proposal. With respect to the provision of employment space, officers would advise that the site is not protected employment land, but notwithstanding this, the employment provision will be commensurate or greater, and the proposal makes an economic contribution to the Crouch End District Centre and secures a sustainable future for the Town Hall. Here's a site allocation for reference. The demolition of the West End Clinic building is considered to be acceptable in principle, essentially because planning permission was granted for the removal of this building and the land in 2010, and Historic England raises no objection to this point. The applicant is offering 11 units of affordable housing. While 11 units does not meet with Haringey's target of 40% affordable provision, there are viability issues with the scheme. As members know, the Town Hall is Grade 2 star listed building that requires a significant level of inward investment, and this impacts on the other elements of delivery. The applicant has submitted a viability assessment that initially indicated no surplus was available within the scheme that could be elevated for the provision of affordable housing. Officers have had the viability appraisal tested by an independent third-party consultant, which was BNP Paribas. This review yielded a surplus of 11 units, and the applicant is committed to this provision. The units are proposed to be located within the Broadway Annex West on the first and second floors of the existing building. This is another indicative image of the scheme looking east towards Block A. The new build blocks are primarily brick-built and incorporate materials that accord with both the Town Hall and the Hornsey Library. The balustrading is proposed to reflect the historic features of the Town Hall. The density of the scheme is acceptable. The London Plan sets a range for density based on spatial location, and in this case, the proposal meets the London Plan target for both units per hectare and habitable rooms per hectare. This assessment also takes into account the non-residential floor space, which has been deducted from the site area in line with the London Plan guidance. The site is an urban location as defined by the London Plan. The heights of the new buildings on the site are acceptable. Haringey's local policy sets a test for the acceptability of taller buildings, which are defined as those 2 to 3 stories above prevailing heights, and the applicants have met these tests. They have demonstrated the proposed new buildings will conserve the significance of historic assets, incorporate high-quality design, and will not impact local and strategic views. Officers have included an image of Avenue Road, which lies on the other side of Crouch End, and while officers are not suggesting this building, which is one of the tallest in Haringey, impacts on the development site, the comparison is to highlight the varied and diverse architectural character in Crouch End, which does include tall buildings. This is a winter view, which the developers provided during the application process.
Can I warn you, please do not interrupt the meeting. This is the first morning.
This is a winter view which the developers provided during the application process following discussions with the local community. This image also captures the existing south side of Haringey Park, which is elevated above the development site due to the northward slope of the land. As per the above, a London Plan strategic view from the Alexandra Palace crosses the site along the Town Hall Square to St. Paul's Cathedral. Officers are satisfied the development would not impact the viewer's ability to recognize or appreciate views of St. Paul's from the Alexandra Palace, and the local view from the Parkland Walk is likewise acceptable. This is the applicant's verified view of the panorama, and as per the slide, the development will appeal in the middle ground below the Town Hall Tower. As per the slide, the development is proposed to be shared use, and that would see the historic space of the Town Hall split between community and hotel uses. The split would be enshrined in the community use agreement that is to be secured by a Section 106 obligation. Officers consider the hotel to be high quality, and it satisfies policy around amenity. Officers also note there is no policy distinction between a hotel and a part hotel in the use class order. However, notwithstanding this, the applicant is committed to a 30-day occupancy restriction by way of a Section 106 agreement. The applicant has appointed an operator that will lead the steering group to bring forward community use. This is another visual showing the impact of the development from the Weston Park excess. The residential quality of the scheme is considered to be high. The units meet with the London Plan space standards, and the new build units will receive good levels of daylight and sunlight. There are a policy-compliant number of wheelchair housing units in the scheme, and the majority of units are provided with private external amenity space, which is an improvement from the 2010 position. As another visual of the scheme to show the visual impact of the proposal along Haringey Park looking eastbound. The daylight sunlight issues have received a large amount of feedback, and the Council has commissioned a third party to review both the daylight sunlight submission from the applicant, which was submitted by Point 2 surveyors, as well as the daylight sunlight assessment presented by adjoining occupiers, which was prepared by the Building Research Establishment. The conclusion of the Council's independent assessment confirmed that while there are localized instances of non-compliance with BRE guidelines, a high level of compliance is achieved across the site. GL Hearn, which is the Council's consultant, is an established planning consultancy with expertise in daylight sunlight assessment, and the BRA guidelines are advisory and must be applied in the London context. Officers consider that the scheme provides high levels of privacy. As per the slide, privacy impacts to adjoining occupiers were largely established with the grant of planning permission in 2010. The applicant's architect has provided a response to the concerns of adjoining residents in terms of privacy, and the scheme is considered to be sensitive with landscape treatment and setbacks to address interlooking. The site allocation requires significant amounts of inward investment to secure a future for the Town Hall, and the applicant's proposal delivers this investment. The proposal will allow for the capitalization of restoration works that will allow for the removal of the building from Historic England's at-risk register, following £20 million of investment. The phasing of this work, including to the Town Hall Square, will be secured by legal agreement and is linked to the occupation of the new build residential blocks. This is another image of Block B at the flank elevation. This shows the alterations during the design process to incorporate materials that are more in line with the Crouch End conservation area. Another slide that shows the decorative balustrading that accords with design of the town hall.
As chair of this meeting, I call on those causing disturbance to cease. If the disturbance continues after 2 mornings, I will adjourn the meeting and move to private session in order to maintain orderly conduct and prevent misbehaviour at this meeting. This is allowed under Regulation 4 of the Local Authorities Regulations 2012, Sub-Regulation 12, Part C.
So we're almost there. So the heritage impacts of the scheme have been assessed by both Historic England and the Council's Principal Conservation Officer. These impacts have improved with the reduction of the height of Block B, and the structure will not be visible from the Town Hall when viewed from the Broadway. While there will be some localised harm in the setting of the Crouch End Conservation Area and listed assets, in line with the assessment from Historic England, this harm is judged to be less than substantial in the context of the National Planning Policy Framework and is outweighed by the other considerable benefits of the scheme, including the historic preservation of the Hornsey Town Hall and the securing of a sustainable new use for the Town Hall. The scheme is acceptable in transportation terms. The level of on-site car parking provided will promote sustainable travel, and a Section 106 obligation will ensure that future occupiers are not eligible for on-street parking permits. Transport for London has assessed the scheme and raises no objection. The Heads of Terms secures a financial obligation for the developer to update the capacity of bus routes in the vicinity of the site, and the site is well located to areas of high transport accessibility as per the map on the slide. Additional details around servicing and shuttle bus provision for events will be provided by condition. The recommendation from officers is to grant planning permission and listed building consent as per the slide, and I'd be happy to take any question that members may have, including questions around other planning issues.
Okay, thank you. Members have any questions to the officers? Actually, do you think we could wait and hear the objectors if you hold on to your questions, and then we'll have questions to either officers or the objectors? So could I have Graham Evans, Paul Toyne, Ruth Selig and Stephen Richter Weston from the Haringey Parks Residents Association and Miriam Levin. Do you think you could come up to the seats at the front here? Thank you. Have you decided between you who's going to go first? You have 3 minutes each, and Felicity will set the clock, and when you hear the buzzer, you've got 10 seconds left. So if you're ready, thank you.
Yes. Okay, I'm Graham Evans. Thank you for the invitation to speak. I represent Hatherley Gardens, a street I've lived in with my family for over 25 years as part of a mixed community. Almost all the houses here are social rented properties, with children, working families, several retired elderly residents, including registered disabled. We argue that the proposed development should be rejected for the following reasons. Firstly, the change of use proposed to hotel creates serious harm to the quality of life and safety of residents, increasing traffic, noise and pollution. Hatherley Gardens is a narrow road, already compromised by events and usage at the Town Hall. Over 80% of the current Town Hall tenants walk or cycle to work. None drive. The new use inherently increases traffic to the area, and our fear is that with the hotel as well, the street will become a giant taxi rank, since no dedicated rank is to be provided elsewhere. Cars will be driving down the road, dropping off, and turning round and reversing 24/7 potentially. The applicant's proposed travel plan, putting the onus on new residents to prescribe traffic flows for their deliveries, is inadequate and unrealistic. With the proposed 500 new residential occupiers, plus hotel, restaurants and other events, the development will also adversely affect road safety and the convenience of existing residents in terms of parking capacity and access, traffic noise and pedestrian safety. Children and older people use this route to access the square, bus stop and shops, and small children regularly play at the end of the street, making it incompatible with more vehicular access. Secondly, there is no requirement to build 7 stories. The viability assessment produced by BNP Paribas showed a residual land value difference between the consented scheme and the proposed scheme of $14.5 million. They have, however, closed this gap by reference to, amongst other things, construction cost differences. yet they acknowledge that such differences are a removable feast and should be reviewed at the end of the process. The inclusion of 11 affordable units, but we note that the smallest possible units are being provided, and only in the converted part of the development. However, the costs have not only been allocated as if these were new build units, they have also been highly inflated from current build costs. By reduction in floor area following the design review panel recommendation. But whilst the potential build costs relating to these units have been removed from the overall costings, we note that the actual units themselves are still in the proposal, which rather improves the developer's revenue. With all of the above, we have calculated that the developer could be capable of making the same returns, nearly 20%, even if built to only 5 stories, which was the intention up until June of this year, when the Hornsey Town Hall proposal was put forward at an FEC shareholders meeting, at which only 132 units of over 5 stories was proposed. If FEC could make it work then, why not now? 5 stories would have a much reduced impact on Hathaway Gardens and the Crouch End Conservation Area, and until such a plan is tabled, I request that you refuse this application. Thank you.
Thank you. Who's next? Is that Paul?
Yes, that's right.
Thank you.
So my name is Paul Toyne, and I represent the immediate neighbours to the Town Hall. The proposed development must be rejected by this committee for the following 3 material planning reasons. First, the plan contains inaccurate and misleading statements on privacy and light impacts. Residents asked the Council's Planning Department to commission an independent review to check the validity of the applicant's analysis on light and privacy. No action was taken. So we commissioned at our own risk the BRE, who provide guidance to local government and are cited in many Haringey planning documents. Their impartial report found the applicant's methodology, analysis and conclusion to be incorrect and misleading. We argue that the committee cannot grant permission based on misleading and incorrect claims. The second reason for rejection is the degree of harm caused on the adjacent properties. Harm is covered in the London Plan Supplementary Planning Guidance. It states assessment of harm should be made drawing on broadly comparable residential typologies within the area. This being well-spaced, low-rise housing with a maximum of 4 stories, which would normally meet standard daylight and sunlight harm guidelines. However, due to the excessive size, height and closeness of the proposed development, the harm is significantly adverse for adjacent properties. The independent BRE report states that the proposed development will create a significant loss of daylight and sunlight for several properties. The proposed muse blocks will create significant adverse loss of light to the living rooms and kitchens of 3 properties in Weston Park. Indeed, one property's living room will lose all its winter sunlight. Elsewhere, Block A will have a detrimental impact on the light for both houses and flats in Haringey Park and Prime Zone Mews. Such impacts are outside recommended guidelines. We argue that the committee reject this plan on the basis that it imposes dark and unhealthy living conditions on Haringey citizens. And the third reason for rejecting this application is the material issue of overlooking and privacy. The BRE report found the Make Architects privacy report had come to incorrect conclusions about the loss of privacy to 5, 7, 9, 25, 27 and 29 Weston Park. Furthermore, 13 Haringey and Prime Zone Mews. There will be a significant overlooking, for example, from Block A, where its residents will be able to look down into the garden of 13 Haringey Park and even into the bedrooms in Prime Zone Mews. The significant impacts on the privacy have not been adequately addressed by the proposed mitigation measures. These impacts would be contrary to policy of DM1 of Haringey's local plans, which requires a high standard of privacy for a development's neighbours. We argue that the committee cannot accept this plan because it breaches Haringey's own policies designed to protect against significant overlooking and loss of privacy to both existing residents and the residents in the new blocks. To conclude, 3 material points we raise make it unsafe to grant permission. Thank you.
Thank you. Is next speaker Ruth
Seneca.
Thank you.
I'm speaking on behalf of the Western and Haringey Park Residents Association, having lived in Crouch End for 20 years and as an architect with over 30 years' experience. Whilst we welcome the restoration of the Town Hall, we consider the conclusion that less than substantial harm will be done to the conservation area by approving the enabling blocks is unsound. Paragraph 132 of the NPPF demands clear and convincing evidence to justify any harm to an asset or its setting. What we are given in the planner's report is subjective opinion based on limited information that's not in accordance with this requirement. Where are the drawings showing how Block B joins and extends the east wing of the Town Hall? The 2010 scheme made clear reference to this aspect of the development because it is of such importance. This conservation report has not even mentioned it. Where are the complete elevations showing the relationship of Block A to the setting of Haringey Park? We're just given scant outlines of adjoining buildings and none to show its context, nor impact on Western Park and Prime Zone News. Where are the views that actually show the 7-storey elements of these blocks, or FEC maintaining that they still can't be seen from the public realm? Where are the images showing the 258 photovoltaic panels on the roof of Block A, 40 of which will be directly on Haringey Park? We agree with the conservation report, which says the residential blocks will dominate the setting of the rear of the Town Hall and are likely to compete with the Grade 2 listed library. We also agree that their relationship with the immediate surrounding is considered to be poor and would cause harm to the character and significance of the conservation area. But we refute the report's conclusion, which refers to the distance of Block A from the civic buildings as being sufficient evidence to say that the impact has been quantified as less than substantial. There's nothing quantitative here. It simply contradicts the statement that the civic buildings will be dominated by the residential blocks. Even with the recent reduction in Block B, it's more than 5 metres taller than both the 2010 consented scheme and the library. The planning report references the apartment block in Avenue Road as evidence when it's nearly half a mile away from the site, surrounded by green open space in a completely different street pattern and not even in the conservation area. Similarly, reference has been made to the 4- and 5-storey blocks of flats at the end of Haringey Park. These are completely out of character with the conservation area and should not be used as precedent or justification for this development. On the design and detailing of the new buildings, making reference to a few heritage details from the Town Hall and Library does not make good architecture, as even the Quality Review report has noted. The massing and blockiness compete with the civic buildings and do not reflect the character of the conservation area. We do not believe the reports recommending approval have provided clear and convincing evidence of the balance of benefit against harm. We therefore urge you to go against the officer's recommendation and refuse planning.
Thank you very much. We now have Miriam Levin. Yes?
Thank you. My name is Miriam Levin. I'm a local resident and a founder member of the Hornsey Town Hall Appreciation Society and Community Interest Company. What I want to talk about is the imbalance of benefit between what FEC is going to receive from this scheme, a Cayman Island registered developer, and what the community will receive. The officer's report showed that the independent viability assessment of the FEC scheme by BNP Paribas valued FEC profit at £27 million, with the hotel valued at £20 million. Given that the hotel construction is paid through the value foregone by Haringey, essentially gifting FEC the car park, that'll be us, the taxpayer, paying for FEC's hotel worth £20 million to them. In comparison, Haringey will receive just £3.5 million worth in the land receipt. Yes, we get a restored town hall, but what benefit is of this to the community? We were promised a world-class arts centre, but what we've got is an arts operator, Time and Space, who turns out not actually to be an arts operator at all, but a property management company whose website says, "Our intention, always, is to sweat the asset." FEC have chipped away at the community and arts spaces, so that all that is left for the community and arts use is the Assembly Hall and the Council Chamber, nowhere near enough space to run a sustainable creative arts centre. Other community spaces will be for business use. The other benefit is the 11 units of affordable housing. That's just 8% affordable properties on publicly owned land. BNP Paribas, which directly challenges the FEC economic viability assessment figures, determines a surplus of £14.5 million, which should be paying for affordable housing, which works out at approximately 40 affordable units. But despite producing an otherwise robust report, BNP Paribas have concluded that despite this surplus, providing 11 units is acceptable. And I'd ask you to consider whether you think this is indeed reasonable, or whether you've been given poor advice here. There's been much talk of how bad the HDV is, with the council retaining only 50% stake in the huge amount of public assets across the borough. But can I just point out that's 50% more than at Hornsey Town Hall, where the council and community retain nothing. Our public green space and our community asset have been sold off for what? Therefore, we urge you to reject this planning application on the basis that you could do so much better for Haringey. If this was a council-led scheme, you could achieve a new scheme that respects the conservation area, gives Haringey the arts and community centre that it was promised, builds a decent amount of social rent properties, and retains millions of pounds of profit within the council's budget, not lining the pockets of a tax haven-based developer, and instead brings millions of pounds of profit for our cash-strapped Haringey Council. Thank you.
Thank you. Can you turn your microphone off and stay there and for members' questions? Do members have questions? Councillor Bevan and Councillor Patterson.
Yeah, I want to refer to the viability report myself. On page 806, it states that the average price for those development units could be £925. It's in paragraph 4.1, but the sum that's been used in the calculations of the report is £800, because it says, well, you can get that later when a further check is done, when 75% of the units are let. So there's a difference there between £800 and £925, which gives me some concern. On page 807, there's talk about the hotel rooms.
Councillor Bevan, are these questions for officers?
The questions are to the lady who referred to the viability report.
Okay, thank you.
On page 807, it states that the sum allowed for the hotel rooms is £300,000, but the valuation put on by the people who prepared this report is £388,000, but £300,000 has been used in the calculation. On page 809, the profit margin is showing at 20% for the residential accommodation. One of the things I want to ask you is, are you aware that a recent council refused an application because of an excess profit margin that affected the logic of the viability report? And my understanding is that that decision was upheld at the planning inspectorate. So I believe that 20% profit margin is excessive and should be 15%. Further down, it refers to the mayoral seal and the borough seal. That's on page 809. And it says that these calculations have not been tested and there's errors in the way the money is paid. And then on page 811, it refers to the rent that the social housing will generate, and it states that the developers have applied the government's 1% per year rent reduction, which by the time these units are built will not actually be in force. So I've actually, I think, listed 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. I think I've listed 5 errors or areas of concern in this viability report that, if corrected, would enable a much larger proportion of affordable housing to be provided. So I would welcome your comments on the 5 points that I've made.
My name is Stephen Richter. I'm an architect, and I was actually down to speak, but I'm only here to answer questions. Councillor, your comments are very welcome. We have no disagreement whatsoever with the figures that you have just outlined. We think they might be best addressed to FEC, but we concur absolutely that these substantiate the claims that we are making that this deal is not the appropriate one for Haringey. Thank you.
Can I ask officers to comment on this as well, please?
Thank you to the Chair. In relation to the points that you're making, the way that the viability process works is that BNP has undertaken an assessment of what ULL has put forward. So ULL is the applicant's viability consultants. The points that bring the surplus from basically nil, so what would be £36,000, which was the initial value, up to a point where there's a surplus available to deliver affordable housing are the points that Councillor Bevan notes. So in relation to the review mechanism in the SIL and the issues that are brought forward, BNP had a professional view as to what ULL's numbers were, and that has caused the surplus in the scheme to increase that has allowed the delivery of affordable housing. In relation to the comment around 20%, that's the industry standard. I'm afraid that any viability consultant that is producing viability assessments will incorporate a 20% profit. That's pretty standard in the industry. And like I say, the final conclusion of BNP, so this is independent from the Council, is that the surplus is generated to deliver those units. The viability constraint on this site, and I think it bears repeating, is that the site allocation requirement is the restoration of the Hornsey Town Hall. So it's a balancing exercise. It's not vacant land with nothing else attached to it. It's the requirement to bring forward a proposal that's going to allow that Hornsey Town Hall to be refurbished and the asset secured a new use. So the sort of bigger picture here, a bigger issue, is that there's a restoration requirement that's associated with the site allocation, and that is causing the viability issues that are set out in the report.
I'm sorry, the speakers can't ask questions, but I have questions from Councillor Patterson now. Sorry, no. Can you put your speaker off? Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. It would be useful to have some advice from the planning officer as to the extent to which profit margin is a material planning consideration.
Yeah, I mean, profit margin is a material planning consideration, but the 20% profit margin is basically established in planning guidance, been established in planning inspectorate decisions, and sometimes where that has been reduced, that relates to where there isn't a lot of risk in relation to development, and there's a lot of risk with this development. And so, as confirmed by BNP Paribas, 20% profit margin in this instance is acceptable and normal.
Councillor Mitchell, you've got a question?
Yeah, I just wanted to pick up a few points made by the objectors. On the issue of privacy and daylight, where there's clearly discrepancies between different reports, it would be helpful to have some comments from officers about that, because I note on page 22 it sort of says it's in general conformity, and that where it doesn't conform it's sort of marginal. Ruth raised an issue to challenge the level of harm that may be done to the historic buildings. I mean, my question was about the latest letter we have from Historic England, which is in the supplementary papers on page 177, where they now state that as regards Block B, they do not believe that causes any harm. In relation to Block A, then they do say that it causes some harm to the character of the conservation area, but they also make the point that it's no different from, in that respect, to their conclusion on the previously consented plan. So welcome any comments on that. And one more point is about the Miriam's comment that the only parts of the town hall that would be available for community use is the Assembly Hall and the Council Chamber. My understanding was rather more than that, so I'd welcome some clarification on that point. Thanks.
Well, thank you for your questions, Councillor Mitchell. In relation to the discrepancy in the BRE, I think that the bigger headline point here, and the reason that the Council sought a third-party assessment, is to firstly confirm the methodology, and secondly ensure that what tends to happen sometimes in BRE assessments is that you get the situation where, say for example, have all the particular windows around the site been tested. Oftentimes you'll have say banks of windows that are left out if the developer doesn't think that they're going to like the result. That's not the case here, so there's sort of broad agreement amongst all the consultants that the windows that should have been tested have been tested. So there's all three of the consultants considered the same number of windows in the same model, and I think that's generally agreed. GL Hearn and the council's consultant, GL Hearn, and the applicant's consultant, which is point 2, are both of the agreement that we're at approaching 95% compliance. So that's the windows that are within BRE tolerances. I think where the difference of professional opinion comes in is largely the instances of non-compliance. And so whether or not the impacts are negligible or moderate or minor, I think is, there is scope for some disagreement within the industry, and the different consultants have drawn different conclusions. But I think the headline figure here, and I think it bears repeating, is that the council's independent consultant, which has nothing to do with the council, we've commissioned the report. They've come back and said the methodology is sound. The windows that needed to be tested were tested, and the compliance is 95%, so that the vast majority of windows that are tested are going to continue to receive good levels of daylight and sunlight. The issue around the application of BRE guidance, so there's nothing in the council's policies that say a non-compliance with BRE guidelines would be an indication that you need to refuse planning permission. It's a sensitive application of the guidance in urban London. Officers have done that. We've done the sort of diligence of getting the assessment done, both on the assessment submitted by Dr. Toyan as well as the submission by point 2 from the applicants. We've weighed it up on balance, and we think that the impacts are acceptable. In relation to the point about historic buildings and the harm, Miriam would know as a built environment professional that Historic England is a separate entity to the council. They don't raise an objection to the scheme, so we're in terms of informing the officer recommendation, Historic England have clarified their view around the impacts to the conservation area and the impacts to listed assets. They don't raise an objection, so there's no objection raised from Historic. Well, I mean, Historic England folks have the ability by way of the listed building. So the way that the process works in terms of the listed building consent is that it's within Historic England's gifts to refuse or direct the council to refuse listed building consent. Because it is a grade 2-star listed building, if Historic England were implacably opposed to the scheme, they could decline to grant the council listed building consent, and the council would have to appeal to the Secretary of State. Historic England has not done that. In planning terms, they have suggested that the building be lowered. The applicant is engaged with that. They've lowered the building twice during the application process. And if Historic England were going to lodge an objection, they would have done so. So in relation to the impact and the harm on the conservation area, principal conservation officers assessed it. We're happy, provided that the applicant is committed to the phasing of the works to ensure that we can secure the future for the town hall. They've committed to that by way of the Section 106 agreement. And again, officers are happy that the impacts in historic building terms are acceptable. I'm afraid, Councillor Mitchell, you're going to have to repeat the third part of your question because I missed it.
It was to clarify what parts of the town hall will be available for community use. Is it just the Assembly Hall and Council Chamber, as Miriam suggested?
So it's all the parts of the agreement that are set out on the map on the community use agreement. So that would be, I think I got it on the slide here, so I'll bring it up. It's effectively the Assembly Hall and the committee rooms, the Mayor's Parlour, the committee chambers, the sort of foyers that sort of lead into the building. Basically any part of the building that's not going to be the hotel or back of room, sort of joint back of house areas. The community use agreement sets out the percentages that are going to be used by the different operators, so we're seeking to secure that by way of a Section 106 obligation as per the presentation. So the use of those spaces is going to be guided by the steering committee. So, you know, what the 60% over the 6 months that the council, it's going to be public community use is going to be guided by the steering committee to be secured by the 106.
Councillor Morris, do you have a question?
A couple of questions, thank you. So I wanted to ask Paul, we heard from the officer earlier that balconies have less impact than habitable rooms. I believe there will be some balconies facing properties and fairly close. I wondered what your thoughts were about that and whether you could tell me how close you thought they were going to be. And also in terms of overlooking privacy and light, how you think the new scheme compares to the approved scheme. Sorry, how the new scheme, yes, compares to the approved scheme. Thank you.
So, if I may, Councillor Morris, I will take your last question first. I actually gave evidence in 2010, in June 2010, on the application as was then. I raised the concern about the proposal being too close and too high to adjacent buildings. I also raised the concern that there was inaccurate and misleading information around daylight and sunlight sensitivities and issues of privacy. The committee at that moment in time understood and agreed with my conclusions. And as a result, the planning consent always said that there needs to be consideration taken to these aspects. But unfortunately, it seems to me that we've somewhat gone fast forward and forgot about that. And actually, the consented planning is being seen as something, well, actually, we will explore and we will take the whole footprint as it was given to us in 2010, and we will then further develop on that. And so, to me, when we're now looking at a proposal that actually is just as close, but even higher, how can there not be material adverse impacts in terms of overlooking and privacy, and as well as in terms of daylight and sunlight hours? So I then, and residents, were looking for the truth. What is the actual truth? How can there be so much discrepancy around analysis? Yeah? And we find that there's some of the baseline calculations that have been done, primarily by Make Architects and submitted, were based on inaccurate methodologies. They were using the baseline data for the 2010 information. And furthermore, as a result of that, you come to misleading conclusions. And the privacy aspect and the overlooking aspect is quite considerable. If you take the Muse block development, there are windows on either side of the development. And in less than 10 or 12 metres, you will be able to look directly into people's gardens and into the back of their rear of their properties. Likewise, with Prime Zone Muse, the Block A is absolutely abutted right to the adjoining wall of Prime Zone. So where are we going to design the privacy matters? And if you look at the application and the considerations they've taken to privacy, the sheer height of the building and the fact that there is supposedly mature trees, but the majority of them are deciduous trees, which means they lose their leaf between November through to May, you've actually got very little privacy. And so the detrimental impacts of overlooking are very considerable. And I suggest to you that creates adverse harm. And so when you measure the public good, and who's protecting the future generations of residents that live around there, this building will last for 100 years or more. Yeah? There will be subsequent families, there's plenty of residential flats, etc. There's a vast majority of people who are living around there that will have that blight as a result of the building being too close and too high. And so, as I mentioned in my speech, my objection is the overlooking and the privacy has not been adequately addressed. And for that reason, I would commend you to reject it. Thank you.
Do members have any more questions? Councillor Waters.
Could I just ask a question about Hatherley Gardens? Because to clarify, actually it's to the officers, to clarify the position on Hatherley Gardens, because I didn't understand that it was going to be an access road.
I'm going to defer the question to the Principal Transportation Officer, if he's happy to take it. The question is in relation to the access, whether or not the access at Hatherley Gardens is going to be included.
Thank you, Councillor. I can answer that question. Essentially, the primary access to the site is by Haringey Park. That's for most of the residents. There's currently a vehicle access to the site from Hatherley Gardens, and it's used from time to time for movie companies come in and they do things, and other people normally drop off and pick up when the town hall is being used by the council. We've had discussions with the developer, and what we're promoting here is only essential disabled access via that access to the town centre. However, we must recognise that Hatherley Gardens is a public highway, And what we've asked for, and where I think the residents will have the impact, is when we come to large events. And what we've asked for is a condition surrounding large events, which is an event management plan and local area management plan, which will have to look at additional measures for Heatherley Gardens on an event day, a large event day, which may mean some temporary TMO, some traffic marshals. And that's when I think they will have the major impact. So there's no getting away from that in terms of large events. But the event management plan and the local area management plan will put something in place in terms of shutting that off, marshals on large events, because I did realize on one of my site visits when we were doing a movie shoot that it's heavily used during events. On a day-to-day basis, in terms of taxis and drop-off, I don't think in terms of that former trip generation for the hotel and for the day-to-day use that we're going to have large amounts of traffic down there which will cause any reason for refusal based on the trip generation information that's been provided by the applicant. It's also to be noted, if I can finish, that we've approved a similar scheme. We had a large amount of traffic using the local network, including Heatherley Gardens, and we didn't cite that for a reason for refusal part of the previous planning permission. So,
Gardens, it's a cul-de-sac, so it's not just cars are having to stop, turn around, or double yellow line constantly. So I think it's a different scenario than presented there.
Councillor, if I go back, cars currently do that now. The highway's boundary is currently as is, and it's unlikely to change. What I'm saying to you that increase in movement is unlikely to cause any significant effect for you to refuse planning permission. So, and that's.
All right. We're not entering into a discussion here. I have another question from Councillor Bevan, and then a question from Councillor Mann.
Yeah, 3 questions. One to the parking officer. Can you tell me whether any of the parking spaces which I see are selling for 25k, whether any of them are going to be allocated to the social housing? Second question to the planning officers. Is there a condition that none of these units will be sold for, say, 6 months to buyers overseas to give basically people in this country the first opportunity to buy? Well, this is a policy that Berkeley Homes, I think, has just commenced. And the third point is it mentions in this report about the option for the London Borough of Haringey to purchase the social housing. Can someone tell me something about that?
Sure. Well, I'll probably defer the first question to the Principal Transportation Officer, and I'll take the second and third questions. In relation to a condition that would preclude the sale of the units overseas, that wouldn't be a condition that would meet with the National Planning Policy Framework tests. So, it may be the case that Berkeley Homes has a particular scheme in mind where they've committed to that as a developer, but in terms of the council having the opportunity to pose that condition on the developer, the market sale of the units following the grant of planning permission isn't material, and we wouldn't be able to impose that condition because it wouldn't meet the relevant tests. In relation to the social housing and the purchase of the units, like I say, BNP had done an assessment on the basis that they were London Living rent units. The idea is that the council is going to top that up with funding from its own reserves in order to get them to social units. If it's the case that the council plans to buy the units, then within 6 months, then the process is that the council issues a notice on the developer. They're required to bring forward a plan that would set out how the sale is going to take place and the council's purchase of those units. If it doesn't occur, then the applicant would seek a conventional registered provider to bring forward those units as social units sort of on their own. So it's an option to buy, and it's set out in the heads of terms, but it would depend on the particular circumstances, and it would be a decision on behalf of the local housing authority. And I'm going to let Maurice answer the question in relation to transportation.
Councillor, I've answered that. As with all schemes in Haringey, we seek to allocate parking by way of a parking management plan, which assigns parking in the following order: disabled units first, which is 10% lifetime homes. Family-sized units, those are 4 and 3 plus bed, and then two-bed, 4-person, and those are the units in terms of the parking management plan that get priority for the parking, and that's been secured by way of condition in this application.
I have a couple more people who want to ask questions. Are they questions to the objectors, or can the objectors stand down? If they're not for the objectors, I think thank you very much for coming.
Are we permitted to make any further comment?
No,
about
not
regarding
unless you're
historic
actually...
England? We were asked a question with respect to historic England. We believe that we should be permitted to make some form of response apart from the planning officer's response.
You responded, didn't you?
We did not. We didn't.
Can you put your mic off, and can we cease having comments from? If members don't have further questions for the objectors, we'll still take questions, but I think the objectors can stand down. We're going to have Councillor Bevan. Do you have a question for the objectors? It was answered by the officers.
Questions should only relate to fact.
Questions are only to relate to matters of fact. No. Got something to pass up to us, then do so and we can have a look.
If Councillor Mitchell can maybe confirm that he did in fact ask us to respond.
Councillor Morris.
I'd be interested to hear from you about your correspondence with Historic England. Thank you.
Then we need to see the correspondence and needs to be available to the applicant as well. Okay, go on.
It was simply referred to the fact that the letters from Historic England, the correspondence we've had with respect to Historic England, referred to specific views. They clarified in their later correspondence that the views that they were commenting on were specific. They weren't general. They have view 02, which you can see in front of you here, which related to the 2010 scheme and the 2017 scheme. And in that respect, they said that these views were similar. What they were clarifying in their later correspondence is that they were being very specific that all they were referring to when they related these schemes as being similar was the view given to them in these shots that you can see here. This was Winter View 02. Had the cameraman stepped two further steps down the street, you would have seen the 7-storey block behind the library, the 7-storey elements of Block A. You would also have seen the extra 7-storey block of Block B behind the library. I think that Historic England's remarks were asked to be effectively tailored to what they were being given to look at. Sorry, I'll correct that. They were simply tailored to what they were being shown.
Thank you. I'm going to ask Emma to make a comment.
To be clear, there is no objection from Historic England to this application. They were asked to clarify their view after there were representations made by the local community, but they have not made an objection to this application. They have written in more than once, and there's been no objection made by Historic England. I think later we'll bring Nairita in, our Principal Conservation Officer, to give her view. But I think really we need to now hear from the councillors and then from the applicant, and then we'll do that.
Okay, so can I thank all of you for coming? I've got the following councillors to come up to object. Councillor Ejiofor, Councillor Carter, Councillor Connor, Councillor Arthur, Councillor Brabazon, Councillor Mark Blake, Councillor Berryman and Councillor Tucker. So if you come and take your seats, and you might need to bring a seat up if you haven't got room. It looks like we don't have Councillor Ejiofor. Shall we start with Councillor Carter? Yes, you have 3 minutes.
Thank you, Chair. I ask that the committee reject this application. I believe there are good grounds for doing so, and were you to so reject, and were any such decision appealed, I believe it could be strongly defended. I'm going to make some fairly general points, and I think there's going to be quite a lot of repetition. I'm sorry about that, but I think it's pretty much inevitable. As you will hear and have heard from the resident objectors, the main material planning considerations for rejection are the excessive height and excessive massing of this overdevelopment. The bulky building on the east side of the site is just too close to neighbours, where it would cause overshadowing and overlooking. One of the key features of this proposal is the tension between the specific need to restore our town hall and the general need to provide affordable housing, despite repeated and contorted efforts to square this circle. You still have before you what I believe is a poor compromise. I'm a firm believer that no deal is better than a bad deal, and this remains a poor deal. Our Grade 2 star masterpiece deserves a better curtilage and a better solution than to have flats by it so big and looming so close. The affordable flats number only 11, except that being so close to the centre of Crouch End, the high proportion of market prices there would mean that it's anything but affordable for most people. It's a token amount and a drop in the bucket towards providing affordable housing. I think it's 6% of the new built area, 6% of the new built area. Conservation areas are a vital protection, except, it seems, when they're not. Yet conservation concerns are paramount here because of the status of our town hall. Our principal conservation officer, who I'm sure you'll hear from later, says that the proposal would be acceptable on balance. I invite members of the committee to pursue this on balance business, because the on balance qualification is used twice and suggests there are quite a few concerns. The committee, of course, can attach different weights to planning matters. This is an unusual application because it's in the heart of Crouch End and concerns a public building that has been much loved for more than 80 years. Simply because this proposal is on the table does not mean we should necessarily accept it. We can do better than this, with a better solution that also has the support of the community.
Thank you. Thank you, Councillor Carter. Councillor Connor, can you go next, please?
Thank you, Chair. I have many concerns around this development. Firstly, lack of affordable homes. As my colleagues just mentioned, within a build of this size, the London plan states that boroughs should seek the maximum reasonable amount of affordable housing when negotiating on individual private residential and mixed-use schemes. On page 47 of the officer report, it says the Council will seek the maximum reasonable amount of affordable housing provision when negotiating for proposals of more than 10 dwellings, having regard to both the strategic policy and the target of 40% affordable housing provision. This approach is reflected in the local plan, the Development Management Policy Document 13. However, the actual level of affordable housing negotiated was 11 units, which equates to 8% affordable housing by unit and 6% by habitable room. Page 35 of the officer report states that issues that are material to the determination of an application include whether the proposal contains an insufficient level of affordable housing. And I would say, based on the facts, that this proposal falls well below the target of 40% affordable housing, so this should be taken as a refusal to grant planning consent. Secondly, the height of both towers A at 7 storeys and Tower B staggered at 6 and 7 storeys are out of keeping with the centre of Crouch End and will overpower the listed Town Hall building. The concerns that have been raised with me as a councillor are that not only the height and the bulk of the new builds are out of keeping with the conservation area, but the new builds are not sufficiently set back from adjoining properties, and therefore the scheme will cause a huge loss of light and loss of privacy to adjoining properties. To cause such a significant loss of light and privacy is a material concern, and I would ask that the Planning Committee would also look at this in order to refuse this application. My third concern is the loss of business space within the Town Hall, and this development will result in the loss of existing employment. On page 42 of the officer report, it notes that the west wing of the Town Hall is currently in employment use. Officers understand approximately 100 jobs are currently located on this site. And I would like reassurance that this planning application and any other future planning application that may occur, that local businesses will be not displaced and are genuinely supported to remain in the local areas. They've built up their own network and support system, and the loss of over 100 jobs will be a huge blow to the local economy. My fourth concern is the transport system, which is currently running at breaking point on the W7 at peak times. This was highlighted by the TfL's request on page 29 of the officer report for a contribution of £475,000 over 5 years for the increased provision on the W7 route. TfL actually got a revised offer of £150,000 for the W7 for 2 years. As a local councillor, this concerns me, as the amounts are significantly different, and if at the end of this development the local residents are left with the services unable to cope, then it will be disastrous.
Councillor Connor, can you come to a conclusion, please?
In light of the considerable concerns raised about this development, I would ask the Planning Committee to refuse this application. Thank you.
Thank you. Can you put your mic off, please? Thank you. Councillor Connor, can you put your mic off, please? Councillor Arthur.
Thank you, Chair. So I've been working on Hornsey Town Hall with my 2 ward colleagues for 3.5 years, longer if you take into account when I was a candidate. And it's worth just spending some time thinking about where we were in 2014 to where we are now. So 2014, we had an application which proved to be financially unviable, weak commitments on community use and access and no art centre, only 4 units of affordable housing, no space for local businesses to operate. I personally think that a huge amount of progress has been made since 2013 and 2014. We now have proposals in front of us that will see a huge amount of investment into the Town Hall and the square, which will remain publicly accessible. We'll have an arts centre led by a Crouch Ender and supported by knowledgeable and well-respected partners. We'll have a community steering group reporting to the council as the freeholder to ensure community access is guaranteed. There will be workspace and studio space within the building. And although, of course, I would love to see more than 11 affordable units at social rent, given the amount of investment that is going into the building, actually seeing social housing and also a capital receipt towards affordable housing in the west of the borough is certainly progress. So with that in mind, you might expect that I would be unequivocally in support of the application. I think we have a good deal. I have no intention of quoting Theresa May, but I still think we can get a better deal, because I also agree that I don't think it's appropriate to compare this development with blocks on Avenue Height. I also agree that the civic building will be dominated by the residential blocks, and that 7 stories will harm the character and appearance of the conservation area. I think even though we've made a huge amount of progress, there's still just that little bit more to do. I don't think it's beyond the wit of the developers or indeed officers to find that solution. I would be interested to explore the use of the community infrastructure levy to pay for some of the work towards the green, thus potentially freeing up some funds to help reduce the height of the buildings. And I think if we can do that, we will have moved from having what is a good deal at the moment to a very good or great deal that will restore the town hall, that will ensure that we do get social housing and an arts centre and community involvement in the running of the town hall overall.
Thank you very much, Councillor Arthur. Can we have Councillor Brabazon, please?
I've been asked to make some representation about, particularly about the Arts Centre. So I'm going to read, and then I'd like to say something about the hotel, or the so-called hotel. This application makes many references to the 2010 permission for 126 flats on a piece of land then estimated in 2010 to be worth £10 million. Colleagues will remember that the 2010 permission was for an enabling development that would get Hornsey Town Hall off the English Heritage at-risk register and to satisfy the vision in Haringey's own development brief, and I quote, "the creation of an interesting, lively focal point for Crouch End through an integrated complex of buildings which promote a varied and vibrant mix of community, cultural arts, leisure, business and residential uses through appropriate refurbishment and further facilitating development." And I think that one of the issues about this arts centre in Crouch End is that it is really a borough-wide asset, and the one that's there presently has been very well received and has got wide use across the borough. The brief was adopted, and as you will know, Judy Bax was leading the discussion about the future of Hornsey Town Hall. And they saw Hornsey Town Hall as a borough-wide resource, identifying the potential for arts, performance, education, community uses that Hornsey Town Hall could offer. But this application simply doesn't deliver that original vision, and the more recent one written by the Hornsey Town Hall Creative Trust, which is a world-class model of civic renaissance, an arena for all that harnesses the spirit of progress, community, creativity and enterprise for future generations in Haringey, London and beyond. I think it's quite clear that ANA have really used the building very effectively and demonstrated that you can have an arts centre, high standard of employment uses with, as Councillor Connor said, 100 people, and that this is something which should be retained. Instead, we've heard from the previous objectors that the operator is likely to be a business person who is more interested in sweating the asset than in providing arts. The principle of the provision of hotel, community, co-working and residential floor space is quoted as being in line with the site allocation and planning policy requirements rather than the need for community arts. This application delivers little more than a commercial venue with some community access, and this is something which is a consideration which I'd ask you on that basis to reject this application. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Brabazon. Can we have Councillor Mark Blake?
Thank you, Chair. I'm asking the committee to reject this application. I share the concerns that have already been raised around the lack of social housing and what is a reasonable profit margin for a property developer in this context on a council-owned site. I've been asked to speak specifically on issues relating to the conservation area, so apologies if some of these have already been raised. This application proposes two large, undistinguished seven-storey blocks of luxury housing, one only metres away and the other actually bolted onto a building that is of huge architectural significance for the borough. The conservation area is characterised by 2 or 3 storey buildings with the occasional 4-storey structure. Attempting to justify 7 storeys, the planning report cites Avenue Heights. Strangely, little mention is made of the fact that firstly, Avenue Heights is not in the Crouch End conservation area, nor in any other conservation area, but it's nearly half a mile from the town hall and cannot be seen from anywhere on the Broadway. In the Crouch End conservation area appraisal document, Avenue Heights is regarded as a bit of a shocker, frankly. And I quote, "Unfortunately," in brackets, "the conservation area setting is compromised by the tower block at number 5 Avenue Road, the aforementioned building. To put it another way, the conservation area would look far better if it wasn't there. Sadly, what can be seen from the images offered by the applicant is that 2 7-storey blocks would block views of the town hall, as well as completely changing the silhouette of this striking building. There is, Chair, a much more recent planning application that contains more relevant guidance on how planning treats tall buildings in the Crouch End Conservation Area. I think 4 years ago, there was an application for an extra storey on the Waterstones block on the Broadway and 100 yards from the town hall, which planning refused. I can't explain the relevance better than a resident writing on a local website, and I quote, "This building is in a conservation area and is within spitting distance of the town hall. The summary of the refusal of this application includes the paragraph, the proposed roof extension, by reason of its size, scale and prominent location, would be out of keeping with the design and character of the existing building and would have adverse effect on the appearance of the property and the visual amenity of the conservation area as a whole. This for a single-storey addition to an existing building, not the creation of a 7-storey block, shoehorned into just enough space between a Grade 2 listed building and its neighbours. Colleagues on the committee, if this application is granted, it would open up the question of whether we can maintain planning control in any of our conservation areas, which contribute so much to excellence in design and placemaking. What would stop any developer anywhere in Haringey simply pointing to Hornsey Town Hall and saying, yeah, me too? It's time that local government reasserted its necessary influence over the wider objectives of developers. I'd push you to reject this application.
Thank you, Councillor Blake. Can we have Councillor Berryman, please?
Thank you, Chair. I'm going to scrap the things I was going to say because they've mostly been said, but just try and focus in on a few points that have arisen around what I was saying. So, first of all, one thing hasn't been mentioned, but Councillor Arthur alluded to, is the way the situation has changed since 2014. And one of those changes at Hornsey Town Hall is the amount of use it now gets. And this has meant for the council, it's become a revenue generator on balance. So it's not such a pressing need to take this decision in a hurry. The amount of activity going on there and the rent being received from all the businesses means that we can now afford to wait a little bit longer. Second point, the low sale price of the land reflected the restoration that's required. But let's not forget that FEC will own the asset and benefit from the uplift in the asset's value after restoration. So I don't think we should get too, if I buy a rundown house, I get it at a discounted price. You don't feel sympathetic for me that I have to spend some money on builders to turn it into a nice palace. I will get that benefit. So let's not get carried away with that. We've sold the asset at £3.5 million. Conservatively, it should be worth the land £30 million. Third point I would make is around the £14 million that seems to disappear in the BNP assessment of the viability assessment. I appreciate that we did that new one with BNP and that came out with 28 million of profit, but where does the 14 million surplus disappear on merely 11 affordable units? I can't work that out, and unfortunately the sort of explanations disappear within the report when you get to that. I do not get how 14 million disappears for 11 affordable units that we may have to chip in to make a social rent. Last point, to try and help you out, colleagues, because I hate, it's the wrong word, I do not like planning, I don't like coming here, I don't envy your role. Emma Williamson, our Director for Planning, pointed out material concern could be profit, but that the profit here is industry standard, 20%. And that seems quite a high profit to the average person, but developers, they seem to need 20%. That's part of the deal with the public sector. Okay, but let's remember here, the developer is an offshore company. So their 20% is 25 or 30% for a normal tax-paying company. So you can take that on board when you're thinking about the profit, that this is actually an excess profit because these people do not pay tax. And I think this country has started to have enough of that. So I urge you to reject it.
company that develops it anyway.
Thank you, Councillor Berryman. Can we go to Councillor Tucker?
Noah Tucker. I represent St Anne's Ward, but this evening I've been asked to speak on behalf of 3 people who, hopefully after May, will be representing Crouch End. And they are Charlie Allen, Annette Baker and Will Armstrong-Sherritt, who have been selected by Crouch End Labour Party to fight the elections on their behalf in the May elections. When that takes place, it will produce a situation where there is no serious political force in Crouch End, or indeed in the whole of the borough, that supports this development. And I was asked the Planning Committee to consider this very, very carefully. To have a town hall means the town hall needs to belong to the community, and the community needs to have a sense that the town hall belongs to them and is not simply a resource to be exploited by some offshore financial property development corporation. That's a quote, by the way, from Annette Baker. To quote from Will Armstrong-Sherritt, the council is selling this for £3.5 million. The profits of £27 million plus will not go to the council, but to a foreign-owned corporation. The council is not getting anything near its 40% target of affordable housing. There will merely be a few percentages of so-called affordable flats and no social housing whatsoever. Many, many locals have written objections. There have been petitions of 7,000 people, over 600 writing objections. I would suggest, and I think the people of Crouch End would suggest, that it makes a mockery of democracy and a mockery of local government process to push ahead with a project that faces such united and widespread opposition from the local public. It makes a mockery of democracy and local government to give away a unique cultural and community asset, not to mention probably the most valuable car park in North London, and get a sterile corporate town square and a couple of function rooms in return. Public land must be used for public benefit, not private profit for tax-dodging developers whose agents boast about, and this is a quote from their website, creatively exceeding residential densities on constrained urban sites. These are the people we are dealing with, colleagues. Charlie Allen, at his selection meeting, warned the Far East Consortium might as well be called the Outer Space Consortium, with a 7-storey meteorite of luxury flats set to smash into the heart of our beautiful community. Tonight, councillors, you have the power to protect that community from this disastrous project, and they finish, please listen to us, don't let us down, Crouch End says no.
Thank you, Councillor Tucker. Before I ask members to ask questions, if they have any to the councillors, I want to ask the legal officer to say a few words.
Thank you, Chair. Just to reiterate to council members, where a company is based or its constitution or its tax affairs are completely immaterial and should not be taken into account in assessing this application. Similarly, the political support or otherwise, or change of political support in the future is also per se immaterial and is not a consideration for you tonight.
Thank you. Have members got questions? Councillor Morris.
Thank you. I've got one question for Zena, please. Did the developer ever have a conversation with the current operator about future operations of the site? And then a question for the transport officer. TfL asked for a contribution of $475,000. 150,000 was agreed. which is a significantly small amount of money. What does that buy, 150,000?
I don't know if they did, to be honest, so I'm going to ask Jason to answer.
Councillor Morris, perhaps you should ask the applicant when they come up.
Oh, I thought the transport officer could answer that. Oh, okay. Okay, all right.
If I can, yeah. There was a discussion regarding methodology and the enhancement of the bus route. And we have to take into consideration what are direct impacts and what the developer needs to pay for and what is a general overloading of the route and what needs to come through to a refranchising or a TfL upgrade. So there was a paper that was produced by the developer's transport consultant that's available on the internet that was sent over to TfL to question the ARCs and what the ARCs was based on. And through the process, TfL agreed with the methodology and the loading of the bus routes and narrowed down the improvement to the W7 bus route. So I think TfL will look at a wider scope in terms of more improvement to more routes, which should be picked up through a general kind of increase through development pressures and growth in the local area. So what the developer is actually paying for is a direct mitigation rather than a total uplift of the entire route. Obviously, the route runs all the way from Muswell Hill and will pick up other passengers.
So sorry, how do we deal with the increase in passengers then on the W7?
Generally, what happens through TfL contribution is most of the uplift comes through refranchising. So these routes go through every 3 to 5 years for refranchising. And this money is used to provide additional frequency on the bus route. So the agreement from TfL and the email, which is also on the website from TfL, it says we welcome the 150,000 towards the increase in the bus service on the W7 bus route. So that money will go to TfL, and through the refranchising process, they'll increase the frequency on the W7.
Councillor Patterson, you've got a question?
Thank you, Chair. Just a question for Emma. Councillor Connor suggested that the proposed number of affordable housing units is not policy compliant. Can you clarify whether or not that is the case?
So the Council's affordable housing policy is to provide the maximum reasonable amount of affordable housing on a site-by-site basis, up to a 40% borough-wide target. So that doesn't mean that you expect 40% on every site. You could have 100% on some sites and 0% on others, depending on viability. As I said earlier, the BNPP confirmation of the viability assessment shows that with the review mechanism at 75% sales, that the provision that is currently proposed is the maximum reasonable amount of affordable housing on site.
Councillor Mitchell.
I just wanted to ask a question about the impact on the conservation area, which a number of councillors referred to. It would be helpful to hear from the conservation officer, because I note the report, which concludes on page 112 about the conservation area, does conclude that the heritage conservation impacts are acceptable. It would be helpful to have sort of clarification on the assessment that's been made. Thanks.
Thank you, Councillor Mitchell. The report doesn't say that they're acceptable. It says it's acceptable on balance, because the national planning policy requires us to assess all harm and give due weight to the significance of any heritage asset that has an impact upon. And that has been done, that has been undertaken as per the statutory requirement of the Act, as well as the NPPF requirements. There is no denial that that 7-storey block, both Block B and Block A, will have an impact on the conservation area, as well as the setting of the 2 listed buildings. We have not denied that. Historic England have not denied that. What we have done, we have balanced that less than substantial impact with the proposal that we have. We have a proposal that brings a redundant building that has been on the town hall, that has been in the at-risk register since the year 2000. Since I've been here, since 2013 that is, I've been to that building every 3-4 months because the Assembly Hall roof is in such a poor condition. Although there are temporary uses in the building within various rooms, it's not a plan that can bring the entire building in full repair. The kind of repair that building requires does require a lot of investment. Over £20 million will be put into this building, and that is not including the fit-out. That is just the repair work. Meanwhile, uses are good to occupy a building for a meanwhile purpose. It is not good when you're looking at a comprehensive restoration of a building of this magnanimity. And that is the problem. The building is very big. It ought to have different uses that can compensate for each other. The community uses will clearly be compensated by other uses that are being proposed, including co-working spaces, restaurants and hotels, that will then cross-subsidize the other uses. And that is what we are getting. So in overall, and also the car park at this point does not actually contribute to the conservation area or the setting of the listed buildings. So the development therefore needs to take into account those benefits. We've had a lot of discussion on Block B and how it is going to relate to the hotel. It is not going to be structurally attached to the building. It is an independent block. The footprint of it, its positioning, is the same as the 2010 consented scheme. There is no alteration to that. The only alteration is that it is 1 story higher and, well, it is 2 stories but 1 story deeper, so it goes below the ground floor for 1 floor, so the overall height impact is 6 rather than 7. And so, I mean, it is the same as the 2010 application. There is no difference in its footprint or its positioning against the town hall. We already have consented that scheme, and it will be now very difficult to argue against it. Similar with Block A, the footprint has remained the same. Yes, there is the height has increased, and there is no denial that will have an additional impact, and that has been assessed. And the greatest benefit of this scheme is that we retain the corridor layout of the office blocks that used to be in the town hall, where the residential blocks were proposed, the residential flats were proposed within the town hall in the Macaslan plan, which was the 2010 plan. That would have completely obliterated that part of the building, removing all the corridors, removing all the panelled rooms, all the original wood panelling in those rooms. We have now secured a proposal that will actually retain all that, which will restore the original parquet flooring, the cork flooring, and those things have to be adjudged against the harm. There is harm, of course there is harm, but we think, it is my conclusion is that harm is outweighed, the benefit has been outweighed, and therefore this, on balance, the proposal is acceptable, on balance.
Thank you. If members have got no more questions, can I say thank you very much to the councillors, and I'll call up the next lot. Thank you. So have Councillor Doran and Councillor Elliott. And is there room for the applicants to come up as well? I think so. And are there other supporters? If you can bring a chair, if you shovel up a bit, because you need to be able to have access to a speaker at some point. You can have one at the end there. Councillor Doran, can you go first, please?
Thank you. Thank you very much, Chair. Can I just say, it would be so easy to sit here to rant about tax havens and destruction of Crouch End and get cheered by the gallery, but I don't think politics should be easy. And planning decisions certainly shouldn't be easy. I think it's about weighing up harm and benefit. I think there's two key questions for the committee tonight. What level of harm does the height of blocks A and B do to the central Crouch End conservation area? And is that level of harm outweighed by the public benefits delivered by the scheme? I would personally place great weight on what our own conservation officer says and the fact that Historic England haven't objected to the scheme. It's not easy to make our own conservation officer happy about these kind of matters or to make Historic England happy when it comes to developments affecting important listed buildings like Hornsey Town Hall. To reiterate, there clearly will be harm to the conservation area, but the harm will be less than substantial. That's the technical planning term, and it's what we've heard our conservation officer say tonight. Furthermore, policy and guidelines dictate if the level of harm is outweighed by the public benefits, then approval should be granted. And let's just look at the public benefits. Over £30 million spent on restoration and fit-out of the town hall, a legally binding community use and access agreement that's been signed by the developer and is available for the public to read and scrutinise. An arts operator announced an arts operator that's already provided details of the way in which the spaces will be used and has announced exciting partnerships with the Art House in Crouch End and John Kilchrist from the Bush Theatre. We've got the developer paying for 11 social housing units in the centre of Crouch End, an additional £3.5 million towards affordable housing in the west of the borough, and a review mechanism to grant even more money for affordable housing if the value of the properties rise significantly. Estimate that's over 25 new affordable housing units in the west of the borough. People sneer at that, but that's 25 households could have their lives transformed for the good as a result of this application. That's not nothing. We get employment spaces in the town hall vastly in excess of what we have there now, local jobs and apprenticeships in construction, and money for the bus service we've heard about, and a SIL payment in excess of £2 million to pay for the infrastructure and upgrades in Crouch End and Haringey, over £150,000 for roads improvements around the town hall. Don't get me wrong, I'd much rather have a residential development of only 5 or 6 stories, but that's not in the application we have before us. The height of one of the blocks has already been lowered, and that's why Historic England are no longer objecting. I prefer less massing on the residential units. I sympathise with those opposing on the scheme on that basis, but I personally believe the benefits are indeed massive and that they on balance outweigh the harm caused. For that reason, I recommend approval.
Councillor Elliott.
Thank you, Chair. I'm going to concentrate on the benefits that we'll achieve for our community here in Crouch End and further afield if this planning application is successful. As a new councillor for Crouch End in 2014, I sat in numerous meetings about Hornsey Town Hall, and it became evident that Mount View Theatre, for all their enthusiasm, could not make the sums add up on this enormously tricky project. Once they pulled out officially, councillors were determined to find a solution for this iconic building in the heart of Crouch End in such a state of neglect and decay that it's been sitting on the Historic England's at-risk register. Not only that, we were determined to find a better solution than a theatre school, which could only have been open to the public very occasionally for performances and a once-a-year tour. We quickly saw what was possible once we allowed A&A to run a programme in the town hall, and extensive community access became one of our driving ambitions. I sat in those meetings and pushed the importance of extensive community access again and again, and one of the things I will always be proud of is to have raised the importance of community access to the highest priority above all other considerations for the procurement process. We have achieved community access in a refurbished Hornsey Town Hall in this scheme beyond our best hopes, and I can see in a couple of years a beautifully refurbished town hall with local people moving in and around the building, local people employed in the building, and even more life breathed into our cherished town centre. And the Crouch End Festival will be running even better than before in a beautifully redesigned Town Hall Square. Community use of the Town Hall will be guaranteed for the long term because there will be a community use agreement in place for the whole of the 125-year lease. This agreement guarantees a minimum of 60% community use, and it guarantees that the operating of the Town Hall will be overseen by a steering group which will include local Crouch End representatives meeting quarterly. From a more specifically planning point of view, the Conservation Officer has said that this scheme is an improvement on the one that was Mount View Theatre, consented in 2010, because it provides better public access to the Town Hall, a greater degree of community use, a greater degree of restoration, a more sensitive approach to the retaining the features of interest, and a more sensitive approach to the public realm. I think this application will deliver huge benefits to the Crouch End and Haringey communities, and on that basis, I would recommend the committee grants approval.
Thank you very much, Councillor Elliott. So the applicants and the supporters have 33 minutes to speak, which you share out between you, but I'm rather hoping that you don't need all of that. Can I go? Have we got Liz Sitch and Graham Jennings? Yes? If you would like to start.
Thank you. Graham and I are going to speak on behalf of Hornsey Town Hall Creative Trust, which is an independent buildings preservation trust which was constituted in 2007. We're a group of local residents, all volunteers, whose professions include architecture, property law, development, events production, arts education, administration and business planning. Many of us have been involved in this project for much longer, however, whether as part of community groups such as Crouch End for People, we served on the advisory panel, the Community Partnership Board, and on joint working groups with Haringey councillors and officers. And 2 of Crouch End ward councillors also sit on our board. Our strategy has always been to work with the council whilst maintaining our independence. We've challenged the council and its development party when necessary. We've sought to provide a long-term solution for this nationally important Grade 2 star-listed building, which is, to quote Historic England's at-risk register, in poor condition and has been in a state of slow decay since 2000 and, in fact, before. Members of the Trust were also uniquely part of the recent Council's ODU procurement team evaluating the community use proposals of the bids. To guarantee its future and meet the needs and aspirations of the whole Haringey community, not just Crouch End, we believe the following has to happen. We want full restoration, not only to the repair of the Town Hall's fabric based on its historic footprint, but we also need to make sure the building is fit for purpose so that it can be fully used by all the people of Haringey and fulfil the vision that we all have for it. We want sensitive, high-quality refurbishment that respects and complies with its listed status, and a similar high quality for the surrounding development, the Broadway Annex and the Town Hall Square. As an integral part of the scheme, there will be a large arts and community space directed by a specialist team with legally guaranteed community involvement, oversight and public access. The work we've undertaken over the years has led us to the clear view that the only way this project can be funded is by means of a covenanted investor, an enabling development and an underpinning tenant, in this case the hotel. FEC has publicly committed to an investment of at least £27 million for the Town Hall restoration and fit-out. Tied to this, the public benefit of full restoration and provision of arts and community space has always been at the heart of the development equation as far as we're concerned.
I'll just continue, Chair. Thank you. We've long advocated for a robust mechanism whereby community use of the Town Hall is guaranteed for the long term. That is, we were not only concerned with the full refurbishment of the Town Hall, but its long-term viability as a usable space for the community. The community use agreement, which we fought hard with the Council to put in place, is not optional. It's an essential part of the 130-year lease agreement and guarantees a minimum of 60% community use. and a mix of commercial and community activities are proposed to ensure its viability, i.e. a mixed-use scheme. It's worth remembering that in the 15
I'm still on. Yeah, okay. I think you'll be on the webcast, so I think it's okay for you to go on without the mic. No, it won't. All right.
Mine does. Oh.
I'll come to you.
Come and sit here.
Okay, thanks. Thank you very much. Right. Okay, it's worth remembering that in the 15 or more years that many of the volunteers on the Hornsey Town Hall Creative Trust have been working on this project, we've been through several development schemes. And we've always searched for a robust mechanism that takes the Hornsey Town Hall well into the future. Schemes have come and gone. You've spoken about some of them tonight, but there were previous schemes to the Mount View scheme, all of which founded mainly on viability. And we've never found a viable solution that's come forward yet, either from the public or the private sector until this moment, or indeed from the community, because we did in fact try ourselves. To quote from the report drafted by the very well-known historic building consultants, they'd be hard to disagree with. If there were an easy solution to the problems presented by this building, then previous initiatives would have succeeded, and schemes granted consent already in the past would have already been completed. We're encouraged by the quality of the development and refurbishment plans and the professional team in place, the work that's gone into it. We're also encouraged by the new operator's keenness to engage with the community and the commitment to work with them together before it opens its doors sometime around 2020. This commitment has already been evident in its work with Crouch End Festival, so it can have use of the square until 2018. Let's face it, no major development of this complexity and size will be perfect or satisfy everyone. But to halt this project now, I just ask the committee to consider this, even if it is not a planning constraint. But to halt this project now would to have dire consequences of costs, delay, huge disappointment in the community at large that this wonderful building and square will degrade much further than it is already. 15 years ago, the community battled with Haringey Council to prevent it from disposing of Hornsey Town Hall to the highest bidder. Now, the council has declared its commitment to deliver a scheme that permits necessary restoration and as much community use as is compatible with a viable and sustainable scheme. And the Trust intends to continue its scrutiny of the development delivery. On balance, then, we support the application and we ask the committee to approve it. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Can you put your mic off, please? We're going to have to suspend proceedings for a moment to try and get the microphones working.
Sorry, Chair. I just tried pressing and holding it, and it seemed to come back on. So does everyone want to try that in turn? Going round and clock. Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
This one looks good.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's working.
Okay.
So can you turn all the mics? We're going to get a roving mic in case it goes off again, but I think if we're ready, thank you very much for your help. We've got Brian Ahern. If your mic can start, thank you.
It does, yeah. I'm not from a campaign group or anything like that. I mean, I've been watching what's been planned for Hornsey Town Hall as it's been passing through in local media and as the campaign's been going. I've been around here for most of my life, basically, like 40 years or so. And I've just seen this building ridiculously underused and mothballed. And, yeah, a cost to taxpayers is one thing. Obviously, when you spread that out, what it actually means for my outgoings, not so much, but a really disappointing non-use of a building. And I'm actually really looking forward to the development. I like the idea that there will be events. Sorry, I do. I've been, as I've said, I've been in and around. I'm not next door. And sorry, do you know what, sirs? I'm just a regular guy, and I think you guys shouting out is really out of order for everybody involved. I'm looking forward to the development. For the events it might have going on, the weddings that the hotel may bring, what this can come back to a community use, and I would like to see it actually happen. It's been out of action for decades and a total disappointment. I've seen this campaign against the development do really well. It's been an excellent campaign. They've generated a lot of energy and a lot of emotion, and I think it's obviously helped the negotiations, as Councillor Arthur is saying. I mean, there's lots of things that have been secured out of this. And ideally, we're going to see something happen which will be a true benefit for the community and the wider community of Haringey. However, I've also seen them enthuse people in a very uninformed way, and people within my local community thought that Hornsey Town Hall was going to be knocked down. There's been a lot of misinformation going around. Despite the energy, we have to also be realistic about what this could actually do for us. And the fact that there's an energetic campaign that are represented here and have been around doesn't mean the majority of Haringey residents and taxpayers could not really benefit from this development. I would actually like to see, obviously, more encouragement for public transport, and whilst I understand the need for parking is going to be accounted for, but really there's a great deal of public transport that could be used to gain people here. One thing that St Anne's, picking up on St Anne's Ward Councillor Kane saying that there was a need for local people to feel like they're in the building. I don't feel like I own that building. I don't feel I own it now because it's out of use. It just is there and it's a cost to me, and I gain very little benefit from it. Many of the objections seem to be, whilst I do understand the ones, and people have noted the problems of the conservation area, and and I can't talk about the issues of the light problems that the neighbours will have, or privacy concerns have been raised. But I do think that many of the objections are an ideological disgust of the profit motivation. And okay, that's an ideological reason, but we're seeing the politics in the world being dealt with by extreme political ideologies. I'm really hoping people take a very rational and appropriate response to what is going on and what can be done. As I say, just to sum up, an extremely good and motive campaign against the development doesn't mean the majority of Haringey residents don't want what these plans can offer.
Thank you very much, Brian Ahern. We now have Mark Wiseman, John Ferguson. Is that right?
Yes, good evening, Chair. My name's John Ferguson of Collective Planning. Good evening, members. Representing the client FEC, the applicant for the scheme before you this evening at Hornsey Town Hall. I'm joined by John Connolly, who's the head of UK Development at the Far East Consortium, and Kati Garamani, the lead architect from MAKE to my left. We also are joined by Piers Reid from Time and Space, the proposed operator for the Arts Centre, and members of the consultancy team who can pick up specific questions at the end. As you are aware, planning permission and associated listed building consents for the redevelopment of the site were granted in 2010. These were then amended and renewed in 2013 to allow the implementation of the scheme. These permissions cannot viably be delivered. However, these consents are a material consideration to this application. Compared to the extant scheme, the scheme before you improves the community access and use of the town hall by removing the residential from it, increases the affordable housing provision, has an appropriate daylight sunlight impact, provides a higher quality architecture and more sensitively restores the town hall. In addition to the previous planning consents for the town hall, the site is allocated for development in your recently adopted local plan. The proposals fully accord with the adopted site allocation in the following ways. The proposals provide a sustainable future for the buildings, removing the town hall from the Historic England's Building at Risk register at a cost of £30 million. The proposals provide community access to the town hall, with FEC subsidising the community use of the town hall. The proposed uses complement the district centre location of the site, adding to the vibrancy and vitality of the centre. The proposals increase the employment floor space from a 2010 scheme, creating over 200 jobs. The enabling residential development provides much-needed high-quality housing for Crouch End, including 11 affordable units. The proposal will enhance and improve the town square and deliver an improved public realm. The proposals before you this evening have evolved considerably throughout significant stakeholder engagement over the past year. We have attended 3 pre-application meetings and 3 post-application meetings with your officers, 4 meetings with Historic England, 3 quality review panels, 2 formal public consultation events, development management forum, pre-application subcommittee, and numerous stakeholder meetings. The scheme fully complies with your adopted planning policy, and therefore I urge you to support your officers' recommendations to allow significant public benefits of this scheme to be delivered.
Yeah, thank you, John. Hi, I'm John Connolly. I'm Head of UK Development for Far East Consortium, FEC, and I've been responsible for this project from the off. Basically, the start of my journey with this project goes actually back some time. I was a previous Crouch End resident in 2008. I lived right next to the town hall. And the opportunity of trying to get involved in moving the town hall forward in 2015, I took it with open arms. I'm advising and responsible for the UK. We have over 300 people employed in the UK. We are a UK company. We are just an international listed organisation. We have done a lot through this process. We have went through a public or due tender process in order to get to the position of preferred bidder, which was in 2016. So from September 2015 was when we started. Fast forward 15 months later, and I'm here in front of you with the, hopefully with a good conclusion of a significant work that we have done as FEC and also with our team, along with Haringey, local councillors and local community. We are still committed to this project. Although this is not a straightforward project, it's taken everyone's time and dedication and the ability to deal with problems and demands from local residents have been quickly and sensibly reviewed. In consideration of all of this and this fantastic building, we must make it a success. Tonight is another significant turning point for this important landmark building. The conclusion of this meeting will either kick-start the works to restore this amazing building with work due to commence early next year, or result in another number of years of this building being underutilised and with further deterioration. My team has worked tirelessly over the course of this year to present a viable solution for the sensitively restore and refurbish this much-loved asset, and I hope you agree that proposals from Make Architects will safeguard its future for generations to come. Our investment in the sensitive restoration of the Town Hall and the Broadway Annex comes at a considerable cost, as discussed earlier on, over £30 million. This is a major restoration project with secured uses like the hotel and the Arts Centre. to ensure its longevity, which is very important for this building. We will remove the Town Hall from the Historic England's at-risk register and provide an opportunity to create a modern-day, future-proofed art centre which can be enjoyed by the people of Crouch End, Haringey and London at large. Many people have an interest in this Town Hall, and we have sought to reflect those views and interests of the local people. Whilst we cannot satisfy everyone, our proposals are realistic and will secure the future of this iconic building. I'd like to thank everyone that's worked with us, including the Council, elected members, officers and local community groups. The proposals presented before you have been shaped by significant community input and the robust discussions that we have taken place.
You need to turn your mic off.
Oh, sorry.
Thanks, John. Good evening. I'm Catty Garamani from Make Architects. I wanted to start by saying that we love Hornsey Town Hall, and working together with Donald Insall Associates, we believe we know a huge amount about this beautiful building. A phenomenal amount of love and dedication has gone into this project from the whole design team, but we know that more and more areas of the Town Hall are becoming out of bounds for safety reasons. Over this last year, more spaces are becoming inaccessible, such as sections of the West Wing and parts of the Assembly Hall. Contrary to the statement by Councillor Berryman, the speed of decay and damage to the building is increasing. If this beautiful listed Town Hall building is not restored and repaired soon, then it may become irreparable. The building cannot sustain more years of damage and decay. We have recorded every room and every wall, floor and ceiling within each room in our detailed conditions report. We have made records of all the original furniture and we're planning to reuse as much as possible. We're restoring the existing light fittings. We know that there are 73 clocks within the building which we're going to restore. We truly love and understand the building, and we're going to make it accessible to all, whether old or young, ambulant or wheelchair bound, and we feel that this is really important. When we came on board in February, the main key move we made in relation to the consented scheme was to remove the private residential out of the listed Town Hall building. We wanted this historic building to have as much public access as possible, rather than being sold off to dozens of private individuals and compromising any future access. This was a move which was wholeheartedly supported by Historic England. In fact, they say in their letter that they consider this work to be of significant heritage benefit. Height has been mentioned many times this evening, but it is critical to understand that the additional height is due to the displacement of the residential from the Town Hall to the new build elements. We've worked hard to keep the additional height away from the surrounding streets, again to reduce the impact this would have on neighbours. We've also worked closely with Haringey's design and conservation officers on the design of the new build elements themselves. We have taken inspiration not only from the character of the surrounding area, but also from the Town Hall and the listed library building. And let us not forget, as has been mentioned already, that there was a consented scheme in place. The BRE report commissioned by Dr. Toyne questions privacy and overlooking issues. However, this report does not take into account that there is a consented scheme and the proposed scheme is comparable to it. In fact, in many cases, we are able to improve the overlooking issues through good design. Zooming out from the buildings themselves, we have created new publicly accessible spaces to the rear, from the new north-south route which runs between Haringey Park and Weston Park to the new Town Hall gardens between the Town Hall and the library. We consulted the public on their vision for Town Hall Square, and we have worked closely with Crouch End Festival to make sure this new design supports and enhances the festival in its operation. We need to restore the Town Hall now, back to its beautiful heritage, and make it a building for the local community as well as for the whole borough and all of London. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay. So if we've completed, do members have questions? Councillor Bevan.
Can you clarify for me this community group that's going to oversee the community facilities?
Because we have a group like that on the Spurs development, but that group is only constituted to last until the project is actually built and operating, then it ceases. So the group that you refer to, is that going to be in existence with its influence for the whole length of the lease?
Yeah, actually, the steering committee we talked about is a contractual requirement which sits with the lease. So it's actually for the operation of the full 130-year term. What we're proposing to do, following various discussions with a number of groups, is to bring that steering committee forward. So adopt that when we start the construction. So that steering committee will be involved during the construction and also during the operation.
You got another question?
One other question. Would the developers be willing to apply a 6-month delay before any of the properties were purchased by people from abroad? Because I think that's an issue that's been raised quite often by local people.
Yeah, I mean, I can categorically tell you that this will be focused on the UK market. There is no the feeling that we have in terms of what's going on with Crouch End. It's a local market. You know, we'll be presenting this to London wide and also locally within Crouch End and Haringey itself initially, and then potentially UK wide. We've got no intention of selling this abroad.
Councillor Morris, you've got questions?
Yeah. Thank you. I just wanted to ask some questions about the hotel. In 2014, Haringey Council commissioned an options appraisal for Hornsey Town Hall, which concluded, and I quote, "There's no obvious demand for a hotel in this location. The absence of a major rail infrastructure, any large employment hubs, or institutional bases to support the hotel use result in low market demand in this location." So that was in 2014, and I would be interested to know how you think that has changed and what evidence there is that a hotel will be successful. My other question was, if the hotel isn't successful, have you looked at an option of converting the hotel apartments into residential? I understand that will require planning permission. And my last question about the hotel is, will you be paying the minimum wage?
Yeah, we'll be paying the minimum wage. I think in relation to the hotel, I think the uniqueness of our organisation is such that we are actually hotel operators and developers. So while it may be considered under a typical operation of a management contract or a lease arrangement for a hotel and a separate developer, we are actually one and the same thing. I think one of the biggest points here, which hasn't really been identified in terms of the viability assessment, is the fact that we have committed our lease for the whole of the building. So it's impossible for us in the current structure going forward to sell off the hotel element. So we will be in operation of this town hall for a long time. So back to the research in terms of what we've done with regards to our hotel, we've obviously got a hotel operational team. We feel that the arts and all the other functions that we are looking to create in the town hall will generate business for the hotel. I've got to be very clear that we are looking to be subservient to the town hall itself. The main thrust of this is to ensure that the town hall is a community, is an art operator, and does that job and very successfully. But we feel that will also create business for the hotel. Plus, obviously, Alexander Palace has increased significantly over the last 4 to 5 years, and we feel that there's going to be some revenue and some requirement for accommodation from there as well.
And sorry, I meant the London living wage. Will you be paying that?
I mean, to be fair, that's an operational question, which I'll have to get my operational team involved with that.
The Council's legal officer wants to have a word.
Oh.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Questions about possible pay for future developments is not a material consideration and is irrelevant for tonight's discussion. Thank you.
Does anyone else have questions? Councillor Bell.
I will ask one question again, because I mentioned these various 5 issues, I think, about the viability assessment by BNP, which I think this viability assessment is flawed, to be quite honest. But the main point within it, the biggest financial effect, is your profit margin of 20% on all the residential accommodation. Now, as I said before, other councils have refused permissions with that type of margin, and they have won their case at Bristol at the appeals place. It is standard practice at the moment that is 20%, which I think came about after the property slump when you needed that type of margin. Is it not possible for you to do this development with a 15% profit margin?
I don't want to go into what's acceptable from a general perspective, but what I will say is the appraisal is not just residential. Actually, the appraisal itself is based upon the overall development, and that's in the consideration that we actually sell the town hall, and we actually sell the hotel, and they actually sell the residential. So that profit that you're talking about is exiting from the development. So the fact that we are intending to subsidise the art centre, get peers going in relation to that, the fact that we can't actually sell the hotel and we're going to operate from the town hall, if you add that together, you can work out that a 20% profit margin, is not achievable, because we're actually holding on to it in terms of the viability assessment. I mean, for us, the overall viability of the scheme is problematic, but actually we're committed to doing it because we believe in the product that we're going to provide for the town hall, and that underlines the bottom.
Thank you. Members got any more questions? Oh, Councillor Morris.
Yes, I'm interested in employment on the site. At the moment, I understand, the figures are all slightly different in the objections, but I think it's around 80 businesses employing 100, 130 people. I understand that it's going to be an open plan hub, which will have room for between 30 and 44 employees. Does that sound right? And I wondered how many more people would be employed by the hotel, whether you can give me a figure of the overall, what the employment will be on the site. Thank you.
Thank you. I'm not sure if you've seen our letter that we wrote into Haringey just to set out the envisaged number of jobs that we see from this development, but the existing situation, as you say, is approximately 100 to 130 jobs over about 1,230 square metres of floor space. The proposals, having worked with time and space, will be approximately 1,300 square metres, so there'll be a slight improvement in the actual quantum of floor space for the number of jobs. Now, there's different ways of translating that to the number of jobs, using a very technical academic exercise, using a home and community agency density guidelines. That would equate to 104 jobs, but Piers can explain in a bit more detail in a minute about actually his operation of that space, which would be far in excess actually of 104 jobs. In terms of a hotel, again, there's 2 assessments using a very technical academic assessment of a hotel of this nature, using that density guidance. 67-room hotel would equate to 67 jobs. Now, operationally, that will probably be slightly less. It will probably be closer to 40 jobs, but there's a significant increase in jobs. So maybe if I hand over to Piers to talk about the actual operation.
Hi, good evening. It's a very good question. It's one that I've been asked many times. I think in sort of summary, the opportunity we have at this point going forward is to use the space sort of in a more flexible, more versatile way. At present, the reality of the situation is, although people feel very attached to the building, a lot of the spaces actually are being used not particularly densely, or I may even argue particularly efficiently, in ways that actually help people collaborate and realise new opportunities that come from working together in, for example, a co-working environment. So we've looked at, working very hard with Make and everyone in the development team, how we can realise spaces which may have different uses by day, for example, compared to how they're used by night. And I think overall, using a slightly different model to the one you just referred to, John, is a way of us ensuring that the employment enabling capabilities of the Town Hall under our stewardship will actually double by the end of our first year of trading. So we believe, and I said this at my Meet the Arts Operator event, we think by the end of the first year of trading, we will have doubled that provision, all things said and told, which I think actually is a fantastic thing to work towards. If you actually break it down in terms of the gross use of the site today versus how we're going to use that going forward, we're actually going to enable, I think it's about 37% of more floor space compared to what can currently be used. And that's no fault, of course, of the existing operator. It's just to do with the condition of the building and how, with this investment, we can actually realise more spaces to help enable that sort of employment level.
Okay, thank you. If members don't have any more questions, can I thank the applicants and the supporters, and could you, and Councillor Doran needs to leave the room. So could you go back to your places? Thank you. Councillor Bevan needs to leave the room as well.
No, Carter.
Oh, Carter. Sorry. Bevan, sorry. So, Carter, I think you need to leave the gallery, I'm afraid, because you're a member of the committee. Right. Do members have any other questions for any officers or anyone? No? So I think Councillor Morris.
I've just got, I know we've have discussed it earlier. It's the BRE report for the yes, so 5 to 9 Western Park, where the ground floor rooms would lose significant daylight and the gardens would be severely overshadowed. There's also Prime Zone Mews and 13 Haringey Park. And I appreciate that there's an existing approved scheme. However, this is higher. I don't know how much higher, but it must be creating more overlook and more overshadowing and loss of daylight. And how is that acceptable?
Well, thank you for the question, Councillor Morris. It's acceptable insofar as that the broad level of compliance at the site that I've outlined, which is 95%. So that's what the Point 2 surveyor's report indicates in terms of the amount of compliance tested daylight, sunlight for various windows. In relation to the previous scheme, it's not the case that the Council's view is that there isn't going to be non-compliance with BRE. It's the case that the broad, big picture, on balance view around what the impacts are going to be would indicate that planning permission can be granted in this instance. So it's not that officers are disputing that there's going to be daylight sunlight impacts in the scheme. It's that those are localized and that planning harm on balance is outweighed by other factors, including the benefits that have been outlined by other officers.
So will they be compensated?
That's not a material planning issue.
Can I just raise the issue that the methodology
to
actually calculate this is all deeply flawed, and it was all deeply flawed at the consented development.
I want to ask officers to speak. Thank you. Go back to your place.
Thank you, Chairman. Just in relation to the last question and generally the discussion, what members are looking at here is whether or not this development overall complies with the general provisions of our development plan. It doesn't have to tick every box. You have to look at the benefits and the disbenefits and weigh them up and make a decision. Now, we've heard a lot of debate and we've heard a lot of talking, to put it simply, about these matters. And you've heard what the elements of harm are, and officers aren't denying there are elements of harm. There's elements of harm to heritage in terms of heritage impact, and that's been fully discussed and assessed in the report. And there's elements of harm in terms of daylight and sunlight and to some extent privacy, and that has been quantified in terms of the reports provided by technical experts and summarised by officers. And these have been balanced in the officers' report against the benefits of the development, which are include the refurbishment of the town hall, provision of housing, affordable housing, the community uses, and provision of jobs. And that's not an exhaustive list. Members have to balance all of those in the mix and make a decision. And there's no formula by which you can make that decision. It is for your judgment, your planning judgment, taking into account all of those planning considerations for and against the development. And I'm afraid then you have to come to a decision. So whilst there are disbenefits in some areas, and we're not saying they're not, you have to weigh those against the purported benefits in terms of making your decision.
Okay, I think it's time to move to a vote. I'm going to read out the recommendation from officers, which is to grant planning permission HGY/2017/2220 for the description set out on page 19 of the agenda and summarised as follows. Refurbishment and change of use of Hornsey Town Hall from B1 use and sui generis use to a mixed-use scheme comprising hotel, food and beverage uses, community uses and co-working use. Provision of 146 residential units comprising the erection of 3 new buildings, including 11 social housing, is that right?
Yes, social unit, 11 affordable units.
11 affordable units. And recommendation to grant 3 associated listed building applications, HGY 2017-2221, Hornsey Library, HGY 2017-2222, Town Hall, and HGY 2017-2223, Broadway Annex. Those in favour, please show. Those against? The application's granted. Thank you very much to everyone. We're going to adjourn for 5 minutes while the hall's cleared. We've got a couple of more items on the agenda. I think you can ask questions on it. Yeah. Okay, we'll carry on. Oh, Councillor Mann.
It'll be quick, Councillor.
It won't take long. We're going to go on to item 9, the update on major proposals on pages 895 to 906. Does anyone have any questions, comments on that? Yes, Councillor Beat.
Thank you very much, Chair. On the first bit of the report, the applications awaiting 106 to be signed, there's quite a large number of applications there. I wonder what's the cause of the delays, and are there any problems about getting these applications signed? We seem to pass these applications, and then there's quite a hefty delay in just signing the 106.
There's a sort of multitude of reasons for these. So the first two are issues relating to the fact that the developers don't actually own all of the site, so it's kind of sorting out how that works its way through the Section 106 agreement, which has been quite complicated. They're actually both very close to resolution now, so hopefully we should be able to be moving on to actually grant permission for those. I think the other two, quite often we do find that with the smaller developers that they do actually take quite some time to sign Section 106 agreements, and part of that is about the fact that they don't want to commit kind of significant resources to actually negotiating those agreements until they know they've got the resolution to grant. So that's the issue with the next two. And hold on. I think the others are slightly more recent schemes, and the Ashley Road application in particular, we were waiting to negotiate those two 106s together with the two applications that we had last week, because they all kind of relate to each other. But you do make a good point. You know, we try to be swift in determining planning applications, and we do often find that developers take some time to sign Section 106 agreements. And in fact, the first two on Lawrence Road, we actually became quite close to refusing them. So you will see, you know, in our reports, we have a kind of recommendation which basically says if you haven't signed the 106 by X date, then I've got delegated powers to refuse the application. And although we let it go past that date, I did actually say to them a couple of weeks ago, look, seriously, if you have not done this by the 31st of December, then we're going to have to do that, because we can't go on like this. And that does seem to have kind of spurred them into actually sorting out their issues.
Okay, so we note. Are there any other questions? Oh, Councillor Bevan.
Yeah, page 901. I mentioned this site before, 500 White Hart Lane. The importance of connecting the housing development at the rear of the site, which is council or probably some of its right to buy now, but that site at the back cannot move down to the high road the way it's constructed now. But if it was accessed through this new development, they would join up and be able to walk right through to the main road. And when we did the site visit, that was seen as a very logical thing to do, and it would improve and make up the whole area much more joined up. And I notice it does say about layout access issues, so I'm not sure if that's the particular point you're referring to.
All right, there is an issue in relation to land ownership with that, but it was one of the things that we did say needs to be looked at in the outline application. And are we, John, I'm looking at you, are we bringing this back to committee for pre-application briefing soon for the reserve matters? Or so, I mean, it's something that we can bring back to members, or we can hear, or we can share with you informally whilst we process the application before it comes to committee. But we are endeavouring to take that forward, and we will mention to them that you raised it this evening.
Well, perhaps when we do another site visit, we could just pop back to that site and see the whole issue at the back of the site for other members' information. And then my last point, Westbury Court, on the same page, that's the block of flats opposite the museum on the corner, I think. Is it?
No.
Is it not?
No, it's just before the junction with the railway.
Oh, okay, all right.
Councillor Mann, did you have a question?
It's about the BHS site, or former BHS. It says a mixed-use development, including a hotel. What are the other uses that have been considered?
Housing and retail.
Okay.
Element of B1 as well.
Any more questions? So can we note that one and get answers later on the access on 500 White Hart Lane? And item 10.
Delegated decisions, which is just a motion.
Delegated decisions. Any questions on those? No? Thank. The item 10, which is delegated decisions, which is right at the back. I've just lost my agenda. But
You know, when you get change of use from shops to other things, like a cafe or a sandwich bar or something, it seems that sometimes that's given more easily than other times, and I'm not quite sure why. Because there's one on the high street here, and I know another one was kind of rejected, but more on licensing than on planning grounds, but I'm not quite sure, like, why some get through and some don't.
You've probably heard me say this many times. Each application has to be looked at on its own merits, and there are policies in terms of the retail changes of use, which are dependent on what else is in that particular parade. So if you've got a whole run of cafes and they want another cafe, we might refuse it. Whereas if there's a whole run of retail and they want a cafe, it might meet that policy, for example.
But that's my point, that I know one recently on the same side of the road as one that's mentioned here, that is a cafe. The licensing was frowned upon, and it's kind of still open for debate. And yet, a little bit further along, a shop premises is going to be a sandwich bar. So do you see what I mean? It's not clear to me why some get rejected and some don't.
Yeah, through I can have a chat with you about those specific ones, but in many cases, a sandwich bar doesn't even need a change of use. But I can have a chat with you about specific ones, because in some cases it might. So there is quite a lot of sort of little niche, niggly issues that are sometimes not apparent from a description.
Okay, so there's no new items of urgent business. So the date of the next meeting is the 18th of December 2017. Oh dear, okay. And can I thank everybody for the enormous amount of reading you've had to do and for coming this evening. Thank you.